I'm from the Haemophilia Society, and Donna and John are here with me, who are both some of our local members who have lots of experience of living with haemophilia, so they'll share some of their experiences that will help you hopefully understand the delegates that will be coming to Congress. I thought it might be helpful to just start with a little bit about what bleeding disorders are, so you can sort of understand why people might have some particular needs that as you come across them. What I do want to say is I'd much rather this be informal, and if a question pops into your head, you sort of stand up, wave, make a noise, do something and ask it as we go, because sometimes if you're like me, it goes out of your head by the time we get to the end of the session. Feel free to chip in, ask. It's much better that you go away knowing the things you want to know than hold on to it and go away and think, I wonder about that. So is that okay? Good. So, as Stella was saying, we've got the most amazing conference coming. This conference happens about every 2 years and travels around the world. We were in Orlando last time, we were in Melbourne the year before, or 2 years before, and we were in Kuala Lumpur 2 years after this. And interestingly, when we were in Orlando, an awful lot of people came to us and said, I can't believe we're going to Glasgow. I'm so excited we're going to Glasgow because I've got relatives that come from Scotland, and I'm sure I've got relatives in Glasgow, so I want to come. I want to find out my family history. I have no idea how so many people from Glasgow manage to have relatives around the world. You certainly do a great job of sharing yourselves around the world. So lots of people are really excited about coming. So I'll start with a little bit about what bleeding disorders are, and then we'll talk about the things that might be useful for you to know. So there are about 12, 13 different bleeding disorders. The one most people might have heard of is haemophilia, partly because Queen Victoria's family had it and she married it off around Europe, which is why we don't have it in our family, royal family here today. And bleeding disorders are things that people are born with. So you're born with it, you have it your whole life, you've got a slight genetic change that means that you're born with a bleeding disorder. And the simplest way to think about it is that for most of us, if we cut ourselves, there's this amazing process that happens in our body where all these different proteins act a bit like dominoes. So if you imagine, you know the stack of dominoes where they're all stood up and someone tips the end one and they run and knock each other over. So keep that picture in your mind. So when you have a bleeding disorder, it's like you're missing a domino in the chain that makes this amazing clot in your body that sticks there and stops you bleeding when you cut yourself. So when you have a bleeding disorder, you have this little row and one's missing. So the first ones might start and then you get to the gap and it doesn't knock the rest over, so you don't end up with a beautiful clot at the end that keeps us safe in life. But what a bleeding disorder isn't is what most people imagine. You cut yourself and there's this spurting stuff all over the ceiling and it's a bloodbath and it's gory. It's not like that at all. It doesn't work like that. Actually what happens is people just bleed for longer. So they don't bleed more, they don't pump it out all over the place, it just bleeds for longer. But that mainly happens inside your body, not happening on the outside. And that's where the issues that you might find people come across happen. So the really common places that people have bleeds are in their knees, their ankles, their hips, their elbows, so their joints. So have any of you had that experience where you're walking along and you're sat still or doing something, nothing particularly strenuous, and you get sort of a pain in your knee or your ankle and it's sort of like, oh, what's that? And then it goes. Anyone got that? Ever had that? Few nods. That could be that a little tiny vessel in your joint has just bled a little bit and it sealed itself up, gone. For you, gone means nothing. For someone with a bleeding disorder, that might just keep doing that. So you end up in your joint with a lot of blood in your joint, and that's incredibly painful. I've certainly sat with someone not long after I started this job, and I was sat next to one of our members, and he started to look a bit uncomfortable, and suddenly he put his leg out, and I thought, gosh, I'm just sure his knee didn't look like that about 5 minutes ago. And in about 20 minutes, half an hour, gradually his knee got bigger and bigger and bigger. And what was happening, as he explained to me, was he was having a bleed at that time. Here in the UK, we are incredibly lucky because we have amazing treatment available. It's available on the NHS and people are able to have the treatment they need to stop that happening. For the Congress delegates who are coming, many of them have no access to treatment. So 90% of the world, there is no treatment. They don't have access to it. So for those people, their joint damage could be much, much worse than it would be for people who are here. And that's where you might come in. So if over many years you have lots of problems with these bleeds, what happens is it's a bit like having arthritis. Most of us will know someone who's got arthritis, but could be quite extreme. So you might see quite a lot of people who have a joint that doesn't move at all. So their arm might be fixed in some way, their knee might be bent or permanently straight, or their ankle might not bend as you walk. And if you try walking without moving your knees or your ankles, you have a bit of a wonky walk. And it can be quite difficult. So you might see those things. Actually, Stella was reminding me yesterday that Tsar Nicholas was a famous person with haemophilia. And if you look at any picture of him, he's got his foot on a box and his arm like this. And that's because his joints were fixed. No one ever knew that at the time, they didn't know, but you'll never see a picture of him as a young child stood up straight. Just, that's one of those things that actually people don't realise that's what life with haemophilia is. So what you might experience of people coming to Congress, and this happened when we were in Melbourne, was that some people who might be staying in a hotel really, really close, even potentially one of the hotels just across the road or the Crowne Plaza, and they ask for a cab to bring them here. And it feels slightly crazy and wouldn't be a fare that you would probably normally get. But actually, that could be too much for someone to walk here, particularly if at that point they're in the middle of having a bleed and need to get here to the Congress Centre. Because one of the things we do here is provide a treatment room, and the pharmaceutical companies donate treatment for people who in their home country never have access. So it's a life-changing opportunity for some people to come and have treatment for, you know, once every 2 years they have an opportunity to have treatment that they never have the rest of the time. So we do often find people asking for really short taxi drives to get them from one place to another. So I think that's something worth knowing, particularly when we're at Congress. If you find people asking for that, there's probably a good reason for it. The other thing is that sometimes if your knees, your hips, your ankles aren't working so well, it can be quite tricky walking on uneven surfaces. So people might ask you, could you drop me off at a point that it might be even a bit further to walk, but it hasn't got steps or it hasn't got cobbles, or they might say to you, do you know how I get round there without going over the cobbled surface or something like that? Because if it's quite difficult to walk on an uneven surface, if you're in pain or your joints don't work so well, it can be much more difficult. So things like that are the sorts of things people might ask you to do that sound like an unusual request, but it makes a big difference to someone's ability to get where they want to go or step free or something like that. So I think those are things that are fairly common in the requests that we get for people coming to Congress, particularly for the people who are affected by a bleeding disorder. The other thing is because sometimes people's arm strength isn't as strong as it might be. They're not able to lift their bags into a boot or into a cab, so just helping someone lift them in can be really helpful. You might sometimes see people pushing their own wheelchair, which looks a bit odd as you're walking along and you see someone pushing their own wheelchair. But actually, if you're someone who knows, if you've been on a long-haul flight and you're coming to Congress, you're going to be walking around the conference centre a lot, you know you're quite likely to end up having problems over the period of the time you're here. You bring your wheelchair with you, so at the beginning of the week, you may well not need it. At the end of the week, you might find you're in it. So if you find people pushing their own wheelchair, they haven't lost the plot, which I think can look a bit odd sometimes. The other people who are coming to Congress are doctors, nurses, physios, doctors, dentists, psychologists, the pharmaceutical industry come, and so there are a lot of people who are coming who will be wanting to see the city, to get out and about. The companies will frequently take the doctors and nurses out for dinner in the evening. So you might find a sort of a block booking to take 20 people. So they might be coming to you to say, we've got 20 people to get to this restaurant and then back to their hotel. Almost every night when we finish here, there will be people going off into the city. And some of the sessions are starting here at 6:45 in the morning, which is freaking me slightly because I'm doing about 10 days of things up here, and it's starting at that sort of time and it's finishing at 10, 11 at night, and I'm thinking, oh, I wonder when we're going to get some sleep. But some of the sessions will start really early, so by the time people get to the end of the day, they may well be looking for you to help get them home. So I anticipate quite a few taxis being needed early in the morning because people really don't want to get up even earlier to walk here, even if they're not that far away, and late in the evening getting home. So I think there will be a fair business for you, I should imagine. Any questions at this point?
Yeah, can I ask one?
Yeah, of course.
I believe that haemophilia doesn't affect females, is that correct?
Well, that's the question of the moment, actually. So, haemophilia is genetic, so it runs through the family in 2/3 of families. So 1/3 of families, it will be the first time it happens and no one quite knows why the gene has changed. What happens in haemophilia is that you would say it's mainly men who have haemophilia, and women carry the faulty gene. But some women, by having the faulty gene, have bleeding problems themselves that are absolutely the same as someone who has mild haemophilia. So you can, depends how much, if your protein's missing completely, you don't clot at all. You might have some of it there and, you might have mild, moderate or severe, so it can affect your bleeding. And there are certainly some women who we now say have haemophilia because actually by having the faulty gene, they're having the same bleeding problems as someone who has mild haemophilia. So sort of, but not quite. But there are also, as I said, lots of other bleeding disorders, and many of them affect women and men equally. And for them, lots of the problems they have may not quite be so much joints, but muscles. They certainly have bleeds into muscles and soft tissue, so gums, noses. Women have really, really heavy periods, those sorts of things. So there are certainly women who have lots of problems from having a bleeding disorder. Some of them will be haemophilia, more of them will be the other bleeding disorders, but there will certainly be women here who have bleeding disorders who will be needing help. So there's not an easy answer to that one, but it's a good question. Yeah. Yeah.
If someone's in the taxi,
yeah,
and they're not very well,
yeah,
do we bring them here, or do we take them to the Royal, or take them where? So
they will know where the right place is to tell you, and very, very rarely is it an emergency, I would say. If they are someone from one of the countries where they don't have access to treatment at home and the conference centre is open, our treatment room will be open. So most of the time people will come here. If they've broken their leg, then clearly it's off to the hospital. There's a haemophilia centre there too, so they will get their broken leg treated, but they will also get their haemophilia sorted, because if you break your leg and you've got a bleeding disorder, obviously you need treatment for the bleeding disorder as well as breaking your leg. Most people will know the right place to go to because the people coming to Congress will probably have been before, so they will know the hours the treatment centre is open. They'll know what the right thing is to do. If you don't have a clue, it's better to take them to the hospital. They know, obviously they know we're coming, and they know that that might happen. When we were in Orlando, they had, I think, 6,000 delegates. It was a massive conference, and they had 3 people go to hospital. So the hope is you won't have too many. I really hope we won't have too many. It'd be great if we didn't have anybody needing to go. But yeah, that's probably the best answer. So what I thought I'd do is ask Donna first. Are you happy to share a bit about her family's life with haemophilia to give you a sense of that? And then John, because they've got different perspectives and different experiences. And then questions might come to mind. And I think it's true to say any question isn't silly, and feel free to ask if you're just nosy and it might not be related to work, but you're feeling a bit nosy, that's probably okay.
Hi guys, so I was probably like most of yourselves until 5 years ago. I had heard of haemophilia, but I'd never thought about what does it mean, what does it actually do, how does it affect people. And then my son was born. My second son, my first son is completely fine. My second one was born. He spent 2.5 weeks in York Hill. They didn't exactly know. They thought it was a traumatic birth had caused a bleed in his liver was the eventual diagnosis. So he received transfusions and that cleared up, and we got sent home and we thought everything was fabulous. At 9 months old, he was developing weird bruising on his ribs, almost like you would think somebody was hurting him when they were lifting him. But it was myself, my partner, the 2 grands that were all looking after him, so knew it wasn't that. Took him to hospital, queried it, and it turned out he has severe haemophilia. He has 0 factor 9 in his body. So if he starts to bleed, he can't stop it on his own at all. So that kicks a process off where you learn quickly how to treat your own children. Jacob had a device put in his body at first because he was so small. You'll know yourself when you go to get blood taken from the doctor, sometimes they struggle. And if they struggle with you and your size of veins, you can imagine in a 9-month-old how hard. So you get this in and you go through the whole process of learning, and then they start to grow up. And when they grow up, they're exactly like every other child round about them. They want to fling themselves about, they want to run about. When my son flings himself about though and bumps his head, I'm spending 2 days in the hospital. The person next to me goes, "Oh dear, silly you," and they move on with their day. So it's a big deal when something happens, but when nothing's happening, he could run in here and now and you wouldn't be able to pick him out a group of children who has haemophilia and who doesn't. You would not know. And I think that's the problem with haemophilia. It's a very invisible condition sometimes, and when it all kicks off, it can be very visible, and you'll see that. You'll see people who come for Congress who are walking just like you, but they have it, and you'll see people who are walking with great difficulty, and they'll have it, and it's a very wide condition. We are lucky. I would consider us lucky because Jacob has had access to treatment since the day now he found out about haemophilia. So he most likely will, hopefully, not end up in the situation where he can't bend. I'm hoping we avoid the whole target joint issue and he'll get through his life. He'll struggle at times, but hopefully won't be in the situation where he's like people you guys will see. John's probably got a different story. He's older than Jacob, clearly. He's lived a different life. He probably didn't have access to factor as freely as Jacob's had it. It's a very individual condition. From my point of view, for you guys, when I take a taxi, as a mum with 2 kids, any help for me is great. So bags for everybody, help everybody's fabulous. My thing on the taxis for people coming here is I think about it like when I go on holiday. So we went to Florida, and I don't particularly like getting taxis when I'm abroad because I don't know where do you go for the taxi. Do you just flag it down? Do you phone it? I don't know, and I don't really enjoy it. So any help they can give me is great. So I guess if you guys think about, they're coming on holiday for you, you know the streets, you know where the Royal is compared to here, and you know that's 2 minutes in a car. They don't necessarily know. And if I was in Florida and had to go somewhere, I might know a street name, but I don't know. I'm standing here, but where is that street? It could be 5 minutes, it could be half an hour. So I guess think about it like that. It might be a 2-minute journey, but they don't know that. So if they're asking for the help, they probably do need the help, probably more than you would realise. And the other thing, like Liz said, about the convenience thing, about getting close to doors and avoiding steps and all that. Obviously, my son's had a few bleeds, particularly one in his knee, one in his ankle. And the only way he could get any respite until we could get him factor was to completely straighten his leg. So we had to take him to hospital. We had our own car, so we drove in the car. But my partner had to drive us illegally close to the main door because I had to carry my son with his leg completely extended in the hospital. So parking, way back there was not an issue for him because I could not have done it without it. So like I said, if they asked to go maybe awkwardly somewhere else, it's to try and sort of save them a hassle when they leave your taxi. So I know it's not always the most convenient, but any help that you guys can give those people, I'm sure would be really, really appreciated. And I guess that's probably it from my point of view. It's a difficult condition to live with, but people are doing it all the time, every day, and most of the time you wouldn't know about it. And I guess just treat them like anybody you would treat that's coming on holiday. I'm sure anybody from any country, you're going to be, how are you doing? Can I help you with your bags? Do you need anything else? And that's all they're probably hoping for from you guys, and that'll be amazing if that's what happens for us here. I think that's it.
That was the good bit. Now you get the bad bit. As you've heard, haemophilia is a lifelong condition. I was lucky in one sense in that I did have a brother who was older than me, who very kindly walked into a window at an early age, and through that they discovered he had haemophilia. So as soon as I was born, they tested me and found that I have as well. Liz has very kindly referred to me in an email recently as an older member. Now, I'll not take offence at that, Liz. But yes, I am an older member, and when I was born and in the early years of my life, there wasn't a lot of treatment options available. It was generally rest, ice packs, having infusions of plasma, and progressively over the years, treatment has improved in the UK, so that now I take an injection once a week, and generally that covers me, and I don't have any bleeds. And that's a great improvement on what the situation was. I'm probably in a position where I can relate to the people coming from countries that don't have treatment. I'm nowhere near as bad as them. I think we will find, and I've not been to Congress, but I think we will find a lot of people who have real difficulty getting around. And they are determined to get around because they don't want haemophilia to get in the way. So you'll find people who will try and do things for themselves, but will really appreciate any help you can give them. Donna talked about haemophilia being invisible. Looking at me today, all right, I'm a bit old, I'm going bald, and all the rest. But you probably don't recognise anything being particularly wrong. My right arm doesn't straighten. That's a result of many bleeds over the years, which has then caused the joint to seize up. My right ankle was becoming very painful. What happens when you get bleeds into the joint is that progressively the cartilage in the joint disappears. And so on like an ankle joint where there are many bones, you have those bones rubbing against each other. It causes extreme pain and swelling. If you're lucky, the joint fuses itself, it becomes solid. In my case, it didn't, so I had to call on the help of some surgeons at Glasgow Royal who fused my ankle for me, and it is better. But I think it's emphasised to me some of the things that Liz mentioned, in that if you see on the pavement, you know, these strips for blind people to make sure they walk across at the crossing, those are murder to walk on, because your joint doesn't adjust to it. Cobble's another example. Walking downstairs, I will not walk downstairs unless I've got something to hang on to, or a stick. And most people don't use a stick unless they really have to. Hopefully that gives you some ideas of the sort of things we live with. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming.